I'm Maggie Adler, and I'm one of the curators here, and I'm standing in the place of my colleague, John Rohrbach, who is our senior curator of photographs, who's really the one who has worked diligently with Dornith on this project, Archiving Eden. So I'm sending good vibes to him, and but I'm happy to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker for today. A few housekeeping rules. We are a free museum, so there are a lot of people in here who I'm guessing are not members. Our members help us do everything that we do here at the museum, and you get a discount at the gift shop, and I know you're all going to want Dornith to autograph your book, so that is incentive. So please join, and please help us continue to do the programming that we do. If you have cell phones, which who doesn't, right? Please make sure they're silent so we don't get a musical interlude in the middle of Dornith's talk. So I'm Maggie Adler, one of the curators here, not the curator of photography, but a big fan of Dornith's work, and I'm really excited that we have gotten to be friends through this enterprise. Just by way of introduction, Dornith is a locally based North Texas photographer, born in Houston. She received her Bachelor of Arts from Rice University and her MFA in photography from Yale University. She currently resides in Southlake and is the Distinguished Research Professor at the University of North Texas, where she has taught since 1996. By a show of hands, how many are her students or former students? Wow, okay, welcome. In addition to being a Guggenheim Foundation Fellow in 2012, she has also received grants from the Fulbright Foundation, the Japan Foundation, the U.S. Department of the Interior, and Houston Center for Photography. Her work can be found in many permanent collections, including ours, which we're incredibly grateful for that. Crystal Bridges and MFA Houston, among others. Dornith can most accurately be described as an expeditionary artist, as an explorer. She ventures to remote, restricted areas, from England to Russia to Australia, some as outlandish as the North Pole, and creates images that are both documentary and poetic. Our exhibition here, which is open until January 14th, celebrates the completion of a project she started in 2008 called Archiving Eden, a title that perfectly captures her simultaneously scientific and lyrical aesthetic. She visited the world's seed banks to capture both the architecture and space of these so-called doomsday vaults, as well as the plantlets, seeds, and tissue stored within. Dornith explores the world of science and botanical diversity through elegantly constructed digital collages of seeds that she calls drawings. Her images of seed vaults evoke feelings of quietude and solitude, a sense of being suspended in time and space, while her images of collage seeds easily conjure diverse images, from petri dishes to galaxies to the vast expanses of space. Dornith transforms the micro-world into a macro view, taking seeds as small as a grain of sand and making them larger than life. Her work emphasizes the power of these tiny seeds to generate life, as well as the importance of seed banks in creating a backup botanical system in the face of potential catastrophe. From these sterile environments, Dornith creates poetic and elegant images that make us think of the vibrancy of life and the passage of time. So I'm pleased to welcome Dornith to the stage today, and you're in for a real treat. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Maggie. And that was a fantastic introduction. And I really don't feel like I have to give the talk anymore. I can just just go through the slides and y'all can fill in what she said and match them together as you will. It'll be a freestyling event. But so I'd like to, first off, thank the Amon Carter so much for hosting my exhibition, inviting me to present my work. And special thanks go to Brett Abbott, Maggie, Michaela, Hafner, and in particular John Rohrbach, who I've been in conversation with, since this project started. Everybody's been so wonderful to work with, and I'm super pleased with the exhibition, and I hope y'all all had a chance to see it as you walked by, since literally everybody who walks into the museum has to see my show, which I really like about that. So anyway, these two pictures were taken about 100 years apart. And they speak to the importance of expeditionary practice in photography. When we want to know about remote or inaccessible places, a lot of times we'll send small teams out to collect physical evidence like minerals or plants. And usually photographers are part of that team, and their role is to collect visual evidence. And when I think about what that means for myself and for others, it's really pretty remarkable that we carry these devices whose sole purpose is to collect light rays. So basically, my artwork is made out of light. But so highly descriptive and clear images were favored then and even today. So here is William Henry Jackson's mule carrying 17 by 22-inch glass plates and his camera across the Rocky Mountains, and Neil Armstrong with a Hasselblad on the moon. So, I have a lot of sympathy for them, and I see these images maybe a little bit differently than many of you do if you're not a practicing photographer, because, the whole issue of packing gear and the effort it takes and the kind of sense of fear of going into the unknown when you don't know what might happen, or perhaps, that there's not really a backup for some of your gear. For instance, William Henry Jackson was carrying this equipment across the Rockies, and one of his pack mules fell off the mountain, and it had a month worth of work attached to its back. And so it was one of his most famous photographs, and he recognized that. In his mind, he knew that he'd gotten a really important photograph. So he went back and spent another month recapturing that. And of course, the poor donkey died. And supposedly this one's name, for those of you who are photographers, the donkey's name is Hypo. Okay. So this image, which has always been one of my absolute favorite images since I saw it as an undergraduate student at Rice University, is a favorite of mine because you can see that while employed by the Hayden expedition to the west to create maps, Timothy O'Sullivan managed to capture one image that speaks to the whole history or the progression of exploration, collecting, and conquest of the American West. So it shows the carving made by Spanish conquistadores in 1726. I always read that as 1526, but the research says that it's 1726. And then you have, so the conquistadores went through and marked their passage by carving. And then Timothy O'Sullivan came and brought a ruler. And even though he was talking about maps, he wanted to make this photograph of the inscription rock, right? So, and the ruler kind of points to the rational, bureaucratic aspect of the nature of the American occupation of the West almost 150 years later. And even down to the fact that they chopped down the yucca plant speaks to the violence that the conquest caused to the landscape. So I have a long-standing interest in the stewardship of our landscape and resources, and I completed a landscape project right before starting Archiving Eden called Agua Quemada, or burnt water, about the cultural landscape along the Rio Grande River as it runs from Colorado to the Gulf of Mexico. And I wanted to reflect the contested nature of this long inhabited space where water is perhaps the most valuable commodity. And interestingly enough, that's the same species of yucca that's in that other photograph. So collectively, these assemblages were made to suggest a more nuanced narrative of the Rio Grande and evoke the immediacy of history and human experiences. So I would travel along the river, and during this period of field work, and I would make photographic slides of the landscape and collect unique objects from the landscape itself, such as soil or trash or pieces of clothing that had been discarded or plants. And then I'd return to my still lives with those materials, and then I'd illuminate them with the slides I'd taken along the river and rephotograph all of that with a view camera. So although these look like digital images, they're actually straight photographs. Collectively, these assemblages were made to suggest a more nuanced narrative of the Rio Grande and evoke the immediacy of history and human experiences. So in this case, for instance, I would take the photograph of the Rio Grande, but mixed in there in the background of the still life are blue jeans, and then there's a cowboy boot and cornmeal masa in the along the riverbed. So it kind of speaks to our shared culture on both sides of the river at the border. So and I should say that I made 4 expeditions to complete that project. So in 2008, I read about the opening of the Svalbard Global Sea Vault. And I was amazed to find out that it was located on an island that was only 600 miles from the North Pole. This remote and secure seed bank is buried deep inside a mountain so tall that if both polar ice caps melt, it'll still be, the seeds will still be above the waterline. And and speaking of like mishaps and being an expeditionary photographer, I had climbed with my view camera and my tripod up on the side of the mountain to capture this picture of the vault is the little triangle on the right, and then you can see way at the bottom where the ice flows come in, and actually polar bears ride those ice flows in and then hunt for seals right in that bay. But in front of that is the airport. So after taking 2 days to fly there, I make my way up the side of the mountain. It's in March, and I'm standing there with my view camera and my tripod, and a polar wind comes and lifts me literally off my feet. And so the camera, the tripod, and I are all just sliding down the hill past the vault, and I'm like, am I going to stop? And sure enough, I stopped. But I landed at the feet of the National Geographic photographers who were all doing handheld 35, DSLRs. And they were just mocking me, So I got up and I shook myself off, right? And of course it was a view camera, which is like 19th century super mechanical camera with no digital chip in it at all. And I shook it off and looked at it and was fine. And I climbed right back up and made the picture. So back to the story of the Svalbard Vault. So when I read that a modern day ark for plants had been built near the North Pole, I immediately wanted to photograph it. I was inspired by the simultaneously optimistic and pessimistic nature of an effort to create a global seed bank. So on one hand, you have like volunteers and scientists and institutions from all over the world collaborating to create the first truly global botanical backup system. But on the other hand, the bleak gravity of climate change and political instability has created the need for an inaccessible and fortified vault. So most of the time, if they don't let people into the Svalbard Global Sea Vault, but say if you are somebody like Jimmy Carter, for instance, and you come, this is as far as you get. So they in fact, Jimmy Carter was coming, and all he was going to see was that frost-covered door, because you're really deep inside the mountain. You're down this long tunnel, and everything's covered in frost, as you can see in the background of the image. But so what they did is they installed a monitor so that you could see just on the other side of the door what was going on in the vault. So you could have really stayed at home, basically, to see inside the vault. But so 2 years later, when I stepped into that vault, it took my breath away. I mean, it is bitterly cold, and there is this enormous sound of wind rushing through the shelves to keep the seeds at the correct temperature and humidity. And I was amazed, though. I had this sense of wonder of being literally on the most diverse spot on the planet, which was on the North Pole. And how, I was surrounded in this cavern by this diverse and fertile seeds that were resting in a state of suspended animation for a distant and unknowable future. So that moment for me was really profoundly moving. So in between the time when I first had that impulse to go photograph this kind of impossible quest, and now the project expanded into this far-ranging expeditionary project that explored almost 20 national seed banks on 4 continents, from Australia to Brazil. The first seed bank I photographed was the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, which is right here. And at the time, they had the British seed bank had come and done, they were doing a botanical expedition in Texas to collect dryland flora from far west Texas. And there were just these small group of volunteers that were counting and placing the seeds in packets to be shipped both to Britain and to the North Pole by hand. So I had expected this high-tech, James Bond kind of facilities, but the reality of collecting wild species is very practical and orderly and performed in the simplest manner possible so that it can be achieved by sometimes only 1 or 2 people, which is basically how I work when I work as an expeditionary photographer. And you also don't have the opportunity to go home for backups. You know, this is from the Australian bank. And when they go out into the outback, they stay for 3 weeks. And they have to bring all their water. And they really, the planning and execution of expeditionary practice is pretty amazing, how much planning it takes just to see, you know, that ratio between how uncomfortable you're going to be carrying all that gear and how sad you'll be if you don't have that one thing. So once the seeds have been collected and cleaned and stored, many national banks have facilities that pursue research on crop improvements as well as the technologies and the different methodologies to preserve seeds for 200 years or more. And food security is for an ever-growing population leads to a situation in which national gene banks cannot collect and preserve all biodiversity, but must make choices, right? And so most focus on not wild plants, but cultivated plants. And even the U.S. Bank is influenced by what Congress is willing to fund. So both literally and figuratively, seed banks conserve seeds or clones and then stop time or try to prevent the materials from changing further. As I've photographed the constant agonizing quest to preserve the spark of life in tiny vulnerable seeds, many the size of dust, like these orchid seeds that are in Australia, I became fascinated not only by the complex issues surrounding the role of human agency in relationship to gene banking, but also the poetic questions about life and time on a macro and micro scale. This led me to collaborations with research biologists at the seed banks who allowed me to use their on-site X-ray machines to make images of the seeds. So Archiving Eden has 2 parts. As Maggie already explained, the photographs of the spaces and technologies and technical interventions required to place seeds in a state of suspended animation that we've been looking at, and then digital collages made from X-rays of materials safeguarded in the banks. The extraordinary visual power of X-rays springing from this technology's ability to record what is invisible to human vision allows a different way for me to address some of my poetic concerns. You know, because a lot of times the things that I want to address with the X-ray collages are these bigger questions about reproductive power or our place in the planet, and all of those are emotional, emotional states, like my sadness at thinking about the risk that we're placing the planet in. And by showing us the invisible, there's a connection for me in my head between the X-rays showing the invisible and what I'm trying to do with the X-ray collages. So as an example, this piece, you're lucky to have it here in the hallway just outside. 1400 ash tree seeds has a very specific number of seeds in the title, which refers to the process of trying to categorize, classify, and contain. This piece is a lenticular print that changes from green to brown as you walk past it. So this tension between the stillness of a single photographic print and then the changing of the color reflects my focus on the elusive goal of stopping time in living materials, which of course at some point we all want to do. So the color shifts in other lenticular works, either from this green to brown or green to blue, refer to the process of drawing and freezing, which that are tasks that are central to the process of cryogenic preservation. And literally, seed banks have to dry and freeze the seeds to make them last as long as they want them to last. And then, of course, I'm also working with the scientists to do these different collections. This is called Thirst, and it's all the different kinds of grains that people make bootleg liquor with. So the X-ray collages, while maintaining the visual acuity and detail of the other photographs, invite a certain slippage between what is shown in the image and what the image is actually about. So you have these wild seedlings, but it makes these references to other processes. And I'm interested in creating work that is open-ended, escapes categorization, and can draw out subtle details that allow for multiple interpretations and resonate with many of the questions I have about dispersal and containment, or the race between reproductive power and extinction. For instance, and this is a little blown out, they have a really awesome new projector, and a couple of the really delicate white ones that I have, you're losing a little bit of the highlight detail, so it's a little more blown out than I'd like. But for instance, this collage of the seeds took so long to create that I listened to all of Moby Dick on audiobooks. I was meticulously placing each one of those seeds on this triptych, right? So, but they may look like clouds of tiny insects, right, or plankton floating in the ocean, or seed dispersal in the sky, or clouds, or even the Milky Way. And for me, this open-ended quality is exactly what I'm after as I think about those tiny seeds and the collective effort to save our plant life, and through those efforts, possibly human life on Earth as well. And sometimes this fictional, uncertain, and imaginative imagery causes a friction when placed to the realism of the photographic work, which I'm hoping creates a dialogue between them. But of course, many times it causes a friction where people will they'll decide they like one better than the other, or that one is more valuable than the other. So here's the little professor part of me. So seed banks, I'm going to tell you the history of seed banks. Seed banks are based in traditional agricultural practices, but the large institutional collections I work with have their origins and ties to the Enlightenment, and were established at the same times as zoos, museums, and grew out of the private natural history collections and cabinets of curiosities. So this is a cabinet of curiosity in 1655. So exotic plants were collected and traded and put on display, and possibly even preserved by private individuals. As you can see in my photograph of a 500-year-old citrus collection founded in a Medici Palace just outside of Florence. So citrus at this point was just being discovered, and so it was being imported from China and collected by the Medici, this individual Medici prince. So when I was there photographing that collection, I wanted to go to the Uffizi and look at the Botticellis, look at their collections, which are so amazing. And I was there, Birth of Venus is on one wall, and then across from it is this work called Primavera, which of course means spring. And I was looking at it, and I didn't know a bunch about this particular painting, but I had this amazing moment where I looked up, and there were all these citrus plants in this image. And I was like, what is that about? Is there a connection to that citrus garden? And sure enough, there was. So this painting was commissioned by another Medici prince at the same time that collection was being made. And it turns out that there are 500 individually identified species of plants in this one painting alone. So that tie between scientific knowledge and beauty and artistic interpretation extends right back to that moment. And they don't know, I ended up, reading a lot about this painting, and they don't know what exactly the painting's supposed to be because the collection of the different classical references don't normally go together. But clearly they wanted to brag on their collection of citrus because it's pretty important. So then I was invited to give, as this project progressed, I was invited to give a talk at the Kimball Museum. And I chose this picture, which surprised them. They thought I was going to choose like a mandala from their Asian collection. And I was like, oh no, it has to be this one. And the reason I was interested in this one was because of the rare tulips. So Jacques Degaine, this is the whole, we always think of Holland as being where tulips originated, and that's not true. They were being imported in the 1600s from Turkey. And the painter became friends with the one of the most important naturalists of the 16th century, who was importing these tulips into the Leiden Botanical Garden. And at the time, they were so rare and so interesting that the ones, especially with broken color, were going for the price of a cart and a horse. And there's one instance where I came across where one of them went for the price of a house. So they were very rare. They were not accessible, and people would break into the botanical garden to try to steal them. But through his friendship with the scientist, he was able to make this painting, which he never sold and kept his whole life and left to his son, who was also a painter. So that brings me to my relationship with the scientists that I've become friends with during the course of this project. So the scientists, for me, have been invaluable collaborators, not only for providing access to these highly secured spaces, but also through longer-term collaborations, which sometimes included their growing seeds for me to X-ray. They've also influenced my choice of which banks to include in the project. Through conversations, I encountered extraordinary accounts of the deep history behind the quest to preserve biodiversity. Many times these were stories of close calls and species surviving against the odds. And so not only would they say, hey, you have to go to this seed bank because this is a really amazing seed bank and this is why, they would many times reach out and facilitate the connection so that when I flew to the North Pole or when I flew to Moscow and then got on a plane to Kuban province, which is 2,000 miles away from St. Petersburg, I had this trust that I would get off the plane and it would be okay, right? So that kind of scary thing that here I am, a woman traveling alone with a lot of equipment, and just getting off the plane and like, I'm sure there's going to be a scientist there that's going to talk to me. So anyway, so in one such story, like some of the stories that they would tell me, so I was photographing at the Millennium Seed Bank in England, which is where all these x-rays in this particular series come from. And I came upon a singular plant in the midst of the lush tangle of the research greenhouse. I was surprised to learn that this small plant had an unusual provenance that embodied the history of British overseas botanical exploration, collecting, and conquest. A family had discovered a leather pouch of unidentified seeds collected in distant lands by a seafaring ancestor. And although the seeds had been left unattended in an attic for 2 centuries under the care of the Millennium Seed Bank, they germinated and a species thought to be extinct was recovered. So this one individual captain had saved a whole species of plants. So this story about expeditions and global exchange is probably just one of many possible stories that can be told from the exchange of materials and information between the New and the Old worlds that began after 1492. The use of Delft or indigo blue in the X-ray collages of eucalyptus plants, which were transported to almost every continent because they were used for ship masts during the seafaring days, so they would have to plant groves of eucalyptus so they could replace their ship masts if they had a shipwreck. The blue references not only the process of cryogenic preservation, which is central to the methodology of saving seeds, but also to the intersection of East and West trade, cultural exchange, and migration. And so continuing with this idea of global exchange, I'm sorry that some of the lighter details are lost in this projection. This collage includes x-rays from the US and Australian seed banks of plants they've gathered from all over the world. I've combined the individual plants together because they're all plants that are related to hyper-arid desert conditions. So they're trying to, in face of climate change, collect as many plants as they can that can live in super hyper arid situations. So this collage includes New World exchanges that have Texas connections, including mesquite, pecans, teosinte, which is the ancestor of corn, and eucalyptus. So I became interested in crops. I kept seeing the same kind of crops or references to the same crops in multiple seed banks. So in Russia, I encountered a dramatic story of expeditions and the importance of specific crops in the World War II era. So in the 1930s, the Russian botanist, agronomist, and geneticist Nikolai Vavilov participated in 100 botanical agronomic expeditions to over 50 countries to collect seeds and crops from all over the world. And what he was trying to do was prevent famine from recurring in Russia through crossbreeding particular crops, such as the potato. And if you think about this, this is just, it's less than 100 years after the Irish potato famine. So in this picture, you can see voucher specimen. This is the herbarium, and those are voucher specimens with potato samples he collected from South America in the foreground. So potatoes have a personal significance, and this image is a 12-foot long scroll of blight-resistant potato clones I x-rayed in the U.S. The piece is inspired by my own family's history of displacement caused by the Irish potato famine. One cause of the famine in Ireland was the lack of biodiversity in the potato crops, and of course the draconian policies of the British government. And here's a detail of that same piece. And over a fifth of the Irish population either died or left. And that included my family. And evidently also Timothy O'Sullivan, the photographer of the inscription rock that I showed earlier. He came over at the same time as my family did. So back to Vavilov. So Vavilov had collected seeds and established the world's first comprehensive seed vault, which is still located in its original building in St. Petersburg. At the beginning of World War II, Vavilov fell out of favor with Stalin and was imprisoned in Siberia, where he died of starvation. During the same period, St. Petersburg was under siege by the Nazis for more than 2 years, resulting in widespread famine in the city and the death of over 600,000 civilians. So although the Soviets had evacuated the art from the Hermitage Museum to safety, they had not evacuated the seed bank. So with Vavilov disappeared, and the scientists were pretty sure that something bad had happened because he had to go to an important meeting in Moscow and just never returned. So a small group of scientists barricaded themselves into the seed bank. So first they tried to sneak some of the plants out, and they lost some of those collections, of course, because everybody was starving. But they recognized that once you lose that biodiversity, that specific gene set, which is going to help rebuild the country, is gone forever, right? So they finally decided to barricade themselves in this building. So this is the actual building where they barricaded themselves in, and then 9 of the scientists died of starvation, protecting the biodiversity of the collection. So how profound it was for me then to step into this very space where this happened with the knowledge of that, and to see the vast number of tiny drawers filled with barley seeds, and to find that somebody had taped a portrait of Vavilov to the cabinet door. So clones like potatoes are not the only crop that lack diversity. Another species I kept encountering is corn. So in the present day, corn is very important because it's used for food and cattle feed and fuel and even bioplastics. So in an effort to increase productivity, 94% of the corn grown in America is genetically identical. So the U.S. Seed Bank collects a wide range of corn to protect our supply. This collage is inspired by the variations in corn. So the colors are like all the different colors that corn can come in, as well as kind of the drying process. But this is a landrace, which is a rare variant in which the husk grows around each kernel instead of the whole ear of corn, so it's like garlic. And they don't know what possible use that could be, but they collect it in case there's some unforeseen genetic advantage to that in a rapidly changing climate environment. So thinking about this lack of diversity and our interest in homogeneity, I make collages and x-rays from corn byproducts. And so these are nacho cheese flavored Doritos. So some plants, such as apples, nuts, citrus, and potatoes, change when they're grown from seed. So you don't grow a plant that has the same characteristics as its parents. So they're infinitely variable. And because of this, these plants are cloned and recycled from one individual plant. So for instance, if you know Granny Smith apples, all the Granny Smith apples in the world are descended from one single tree that was grown in Australia by Granny Smith in the 1850s. And so each one, they just cut a little piece off that plant and graft it onto another tree and then graft that to another one. So there's this endless recycling of this genetic information, which of course allows us to have Granny Smith apples all over the world, but also puts us at kind of risk. And of course, I'm sorry, this is also, there's some delicate details of those are banana clones. And of course, banana clones are also, bananas are also grown from clones, and they're at risk right now from a blight that is very similar to the potato blight. So the Lord Cavendish banana that we have today is going to go away, but I was fortunate enough to eat the replacement in Brazil, and it's pretty good, but it's square-shaped. It's odd. It's like, okay, but it tastes good. So as I've worked on this project, I've encountered other threats to preserving biodiversity. So access to economic resources is a factor that affects even the largest banks, as I mentioned before. And this is the Russian National Collection of Barley, which is located 2,000 miles from that other barley collection, which was in St. Petersburg. This is in this remote center of biodiversity and crop research that they have in Kuban province in Russia. And the size and the condition of the seed bank's collections are not necessarily a reflection of the richness of the botanical diversity of any particular country, such as Australia, which is where these are, but rather a reflection of the resources they were able to devote to this effort. So other threats may be declining populations in the plants. In this X-ray collage, Finite, the plant that generates these seeds only exists on the planet in a space that is the size of the projection of this image. So, and the reason that they even found it is that there was a mining company that was going into out in the outback in Australia, and they sent a plant survey and botanical expedition, and they found the plant, and collected it and brought it back, because now it won't exist in the wild at all anymore. So anyway, so this kind of looks like either it's a telescope or a microscope. And for me, I'm thinking about how even though we think of life as finite, as infinite, it's actually, in fact, there's a finite number. And that's what the title of the piece is finite. So in the face of these risks to preserving biodiversity, there are hopeful moments, such as the networks of scientists working in remote locations and dedicating themselves to creating centers of protected biodiversity. So these kind of singular scientists are working by themselves, but they're connected And supporting their efforts is this kind of expansive professional network that fosters the exchange of research, botanical materials, and information. And in my case, they exchanged me, right? I was able to kind of tap into that network and be passed along with all the information that they were doing. So in Australia, I also encountered the wonderfully optimistic story of the Wallamai pine. It was a plant that existed at the time of the dinosaurs, and everybody thought it was extinct. It was only known from the fossil record. And then a park ranger was out exploring one of their remote valley in one of the parks in Australia and found a remnant population of the living trees that were there from the time of the dinosaurs. And so all the scientists colluded to keep it secret until they could transport the plant back and then figure out how it reproduced, because it was so old it doesn't reproduce like trees reproduce today. But because of this, they saved this tree, and it's now found literally in all the botanical gardens in the world. So and this image is made from research cross-sections of one tree. And so this photograph shows seeds waiting to be placed in the Svalbard vault. The U.S. boxes are on the right-hand side, and that one little red box on the far left is the box of seeds from Uganda. So in 2010, one of the most biodiverse places in the world, which is Uganda, was only able to send this one tiny box of seeds. And so at first it made me super sad, because I was like, oh, look at that. There it is, the economic disparity, the cost of global conflict. It's all there in this one image. And it made me really sad. And then I realized that, there's one or two scientists in Uganda that were dedicated to saving those plants. And so they repurposed a box and collected those seeds and managed to get it to Svalbard. So those seeds are safe. Those species are safe. And so when I think about this kind of risk and declining biodiversity, those kind of stories where, one seafaring captain or, some couple of scientists in Uganda are able to send these seeds forward, that really gives me a sense of hope. So thank you.
We do have time for a few questions, so we've got some questions out there.
Jack. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell. Jack.
If Jimmy Carter could only get to the door, how did you get in?
Repeat the question.
Oh, thank you. I will forget to do that, so you're going to have to do that every time. If Jimmy Carter can get into the vault, how did little old me get in there? And part of it was I was there with the founder of the Svalbard Vault, and I was there for a particular reason. And so I had special access because of being an expeditionary photographer, right? So they don't, there are every country that places seeds in the sea vault has a separate treaty to ensure that it's their cultural patrimony. So they don't, it's like going into somebody's a safe deposit box. So they have to be really they don't want to turn it into like a place for global ecotourism, because of the seriousness of it and the gravity of the food security and what have you. So they let me in because of my project. But there were only like 3 people in the cavern that day. It was the founder, one other guy, and they were moving all the boxes by hand, and then the National Geographic photographer, and then myself. Yes?
What's the difference in reproduction from that tree in Australia?
It's really crazy. They don't have seeds. So how are the Wallamai pines, what is the difference in their reproductive strategy compared to contemporary trees? Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. Every time you're going to have to they reproduce with spores instead of seeds. But they can also clone them. Yes?
Okay, I have a question. You had said that the blue in a lot of your images reference east and west, and then also just the dyes are used. Are you also
So the question is that I had said that the blue referred to like the cryogenic process, but also the meeting of east and west and Delft blue or indigo blue, right? That refers to that. But was I also influenced by the history of photography and cyanotypes? Yeah, you know, people ask that question a lot because there is a very famous 19th century woman botanist who produced the first photographic book, was this book of cyanotypes, and it's a typology of British algae. And I almost put her in my talk because of that connection of the scientific knowledge and the tie to her work specifically. And I would say no. Interestingly enough, it's really about the kind of cultural meaning of the blue rather than the specific tie to photography. And it's partly because I don't do alternative processes. But thank you. That's a great question. Yes?
So as a female photographer, can you share some of your insights on what it's like traveling around the world and especially when it comes to like safety and such?
Okay, as a female photographer, can I share what it's like to travel alone by myself in regards to like safety and other issues? It's tough. It's really interesting that the process is tough, and I was shielded a little bit because of the scientific community in this one, where I was like I went to Bahia, Brazil, and then I went 3 hours by car or way out into the countryside in Brazil, and it's always with the knowledge that there is a scientific community. So of course, I'm traveling by myself. I'm stuck in airports by myself in Russia, where I don't speak Russian and I don't read Russian, and so so there is that feeling of risk. I feel it more today. I'm working on a series that is taking me to land bridges around the world. So I've gone to Panama and a couple other kind of more remote places, and those were there. I feel that absence where I'm going to kind of more threatening places. So it does feel risky, and I've gotten very good at like eating by myself, and like spending a lot of time by myself as I'm working. But when I'm on an expedition, I usually just really literally work all the time, because the time is so short. So I work all the time, and maybe I'll take a nap while I'm waiting the light to change, and I pack like little power bars, because a lot of times you'll get someplace and there's no food, there's no water, and you have to just like press on. So it's been really interesting. Yes?
The medicine is based on plants.
Yes.
And they said they're dying, and so the medicine has to die in a way.
So that since plants are are the beginning of medicine, are plant-based materials, and now that the plants are dying, the medicine is going away. That's true, and they don't even know. That's one of my questions about seed banking in general, since they're having, because of economic reasons, focus on things they already know and crops they already know. The potential for what we're missing, for instance, where the rainforest is decreasing in biodiversity very quickly due to habitat change, that there might be future medicines that we'll never know about and then will be lost because of that. Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I know that you consider yourself an expeditionary photographer. Could you briefly describe like your first real journey in that role?
Wow. The first one in that role is... Well, it's so funny because it's like, well, always. So my first job after undergraduate school was going as the interpreter and factotum for a summer photography program in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. And so my job, the very first job I had that was about this was like to take all of the enlargers. They were paying the school with enlargers, the place with enlargers, and like take them across the border, and then like managed to talk my way across Mexican customs with 20 Omega D XL enlargers in the back of a truck, right? And John Orfield, my husband now, was there as my boyfriend, and just two little 20-year-olds, you know, big smiles like, hi. So, right? So from that point, you know, and then I was taking the cameras out in Mexico while we were working. So right from the get-go, that notion of we're leaving Texas and we're putting everything in the back of a truck and we're going to San Miguel de Allende, which is a 2-day drive, to make the picture. So, you know, crazy enough. That's always been embedded in that project, in that process. Yeah.
You see a day when we'll be taking our seeds with us to outer space, to Mars, to other...
Oh, you know, they're already taking them. They're testing them. And so
What seeds would you take?
Oh, what seeds would I take, right? Bananas. No. No, but, you know, it's interesting because it's the same kind of, they're thinking about seed banks and diversity and what's going to grow in space. And I've been reading about that because of the notion of the microbial cloud, that humans have a microbial cloud around them that's like in the trillions of microbes that each person hosts and is part of our health. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so they're trying, now that they're on Mars, of trying not to introduce our microbes into Mars so that they can find the microbes that are there, because since they found water, they're pretty sure there's microbes there. So that notion of trying to prevent us colonizing another planet with our unintentionally, like the way that we introduced, you know, smallpox was one of the things that came with the Columbian Exchange as well. So that thing of like not sharing little tiny seeds in the terms of microbes between our two planets is super interesting to me. That was the eggheady answer, I'm sorry. Yes, Tom.
So you talked a lot about corn. I guess my question is, what's the role of GMOs? Is this all the corn, all the seeds and all that, are they considered non-GMO? Or is that like an impossibility?
It's an impossibility now. But there's a law that states that no GMOs are allowed in the seed bank. It's because it's under Norwegian law, and they're anti-GMO. But think about it, you know, there is pollen that's floating around in those clouds in the sky, too, that are crossbreeding. And we've had those instances in the United States where Monsanto and others have planted, trademarked, or I can't remember, you know, proprietary corn, and then some farmer who's growing organic corn next door is sued by Monsanto because they say, well, our proprietary pollen crossbred with your corn, so now you can't keep those seeds to plant next year because those are our seeds and we're going to charge you for them. And so they were very aggressive about pursuing that, and they finally kind of fixed it, but it was a thing for a long time. Sorry, that's a dark story.
Let's do one more question.
Okay. Yeah.
My question is about your access to these seed vaults. Obviously, a lot of scientists have access to it. Do you generally find that they're very accommodating to you with your art project and your advocacy, or have you been in more hostile situations where they don't allow you access?
Okay, so the question is about access, is that that was a long and complicated question. So do I have, how has my access been in terms of, are they always supportive because of are the scientists always supportive, right? That's the question. Well, I've worked very hard at the access aspect of that. And a lot of times I'll be contacted actually by other photographers trying to get into the seed banks, especially Svalbard, since it's so famous now. And it's really a difficult question because they have to balance the need for getting their work done and security. And I jokingly call it 50 first dates, because when I land there, I have to convince them that I'm not going to break things, and I'm not going to use. You know, there has to build trust very, very quickly. And because of the length of the project and the references from each seed banker to the next in that kind of scientific network, they really do trust me enough to say, I can speak for her and you should let her in. Because I'm doing some, you know, like I'm using their $200,000 x-ray machines, and I'm using research seedlings that could be used for other purposes. So they really have to feel that what I'm doing is legitimate. And so that's been a really something I'm kind of proud about, that has kind of developed for me with them. And it's led to other types of scientists reaching out to partner with me in an interesting way. So I've got like 5 projects going on right now. Okay, thanks so much for coming.